Thank you, and for the first time, I can say thank you, Chairman Ruda. Yes. Good to follow Mr. Graves. And I want to thank the subcommittee for honoring my request to hold this hearing today. It's a most important subject, and I was at Judiciary with FISA and then with some eye doctors on the power of stem cells and recreating vision. So you're in good company, but I'm late. It's very important we have the opportunity to examine the impact of coal plants and coal ash dumps on groundwater quality and to examine the effects of coal ash contamination on the quality of drinking water for communities across this country. The issue of coal ash is very personal to my district and myself. The residents of my state have been seeing it in two spots in particular. I've been working alongside my fellow congressman, former fellow Tennessee General Assembly colleague Tim Burchett, a stalwart on this fight, to continue to shine some light on this important issue. 2008, the largest coal ash spill in our nation's history occurred in Tennessee when a dike failed at TVA's Kingston fossil plant, and 5.4 million cubic yards of coal ash cascaded into the Emory and Clinch rivers and smothered about 300 acres of land. I met with TVA officials yesterday. They assured me they're working on the cleanup and looking into the conditions of the workers who claim they've been damaged with health care maladies, and they said this was a preventable accident. Hopefully we won't see it ever again, and they promised me it won't happen again. I think TVA's got good new leadership, and I'm pleased about that. We're here in 2019, and hundreds of people are still dealing with the aftermath of that disaster, though. Meanwhile, the EPA seems to be intent on weakening federal protections for coal ash, and that's disappointing. I would hope that the EPA would work with TVA to see what happened at Kingston and try to see that it doesn't happen again. And in Memphis, they've left a lot of coal ash at a plant, and it's going to be 20 years to rid us of all of it. So that's another area of concern. Mr. Ross, on April 15, the EPA reversed its position for over 40 years and determined that the Clean Water Act does not apply to discharges of pollutions that flow through groundwater before reaching a river, lake, or stream. This action clearly goes against the plain language of the Clean Water Act and creates a glaring loophole which could have disastrous impacts on water quality. The Clean Water Act is vital in preventing even more environmental harm from the disposal of toxic coal ash left at coal power plants across the nation. And that's what we've got in Memphis, is a coal plant now vestigial. There are approximately 1,400 coal ash sites across the country where deadly toxic waste has been disposed of, posing threats to clean water and people's health. And Memphis is one of the finest clean water aquifers in the world, and our folks are concerned about its being contaminated. 92% of coal ash ponds covered by this rule are currently contaminating groundwater at levels exceeding federal health standards. The Allen Fossil Plant in my district is identified as one of the most contaminated sites in the country, with levels of contamination hundreds of times higher than what could be considered safe. So, Mr. Ross, my question: for decades, regulation under state laws and other federal statutes, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act and Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, reportedly been shown to be insufficient to protect communities from water pollution. How do you plan to protect these communities, such as Memphis and other Upper East Tennessee, folks in Kingston, living near toxic coal ash sites that are leaching into groundwater and traveling to surface water?
Well, there are multiple mechanisms in play there, whether or not it's the CCR rule, or you have some of our, whether or not state authority under state law. We have other programs at the federal level. But I want to address one of the things that you said about the 40 years of EPA position on the discharges to groundwater. It hasn't been 40 years. We put out a notice early last year trying to decide what is the actual scope of authority under the Clean Water Act for discharges to groundwater. And we got thousands and thousands of comments back. And what we learned is that the EPA originally had a position that it doesn't discharge, we don't regulate discharges of groundwater, because that's exactly what Congress intended. The EPA administrator actually asked Congress up through the debates in the 1972 amendments to ask for authority to regulate groundwater. There were amendments that were proposed to go after and expand the 402 program to extend to discharges of groundwater, and Congress specifically rejected that. And so in the world of statutory interpretation, that's fairly significant guidance to us. And so our position is, we started with what our legal authority is. when we wrote that interpretive statement. We didn't follow the Ninth Circuit or the Fourth Circuit. We didn't follow the Sixth Circuit. We figured out what our legal authority really was before deciding what our outcome is.
And when you figured that out, was that less than the circuits had given you authority to do, or more?
Well, so right now in the Fourth and the Ninth, where there's those courts have taken the position that, and Chair, if I may answer the question, I'm happy to. So rather than, even though I don't necessarily agree legally with the rationale of those courts, we are not upsetting the decisions in the Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit because we know the Supreme Court has accepted cert and is taking this interesting and difficult question up. And so before EPA goes through a rulemaking, for example, we're going to, if we are, have the benefit of Supreme Court guidance, we're certainly going to take that into account. And so we recognize the decisions in the Fourth and the Ninth Circuit, just like we recognize the decisions in the Sixth Circuit.
And that wasn't, I appreciate that, but that wasn't the question I asked. My question was, when you came up with your opinion or your thoughts on what your jurisdiction was, your legal authority, was that more or less than the Fourth, Ninth, and Sixth Circuits allowed you?
It's less.
Time has expired, but allow the witness to answer the question.
It's less. As we explain in our interpretive statement, we have a different position than the Ninth and the Fourth Circuit, and we don't believe we have the legal authority to direct, to apply the 402 program to direct discharges of groundwater.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask for another minute or two, since I asked for this hearing, and just to get a few.
So granted.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I wish you would go more expansive. It's the people's health that's at stake. It's the water. Water internal, water external, water eternal. That's what we're about. Water creates us. Water makes us live. Water cleans up our lives, allows us to survive. If we have blessed with clean water, we need to keep it. We don't need to find ways to get around enforcing laws that protect water. Water is the most essential element on Earth. I mean, it's there, oxygen, okay. Water, right together, H2O. A. B, we know that coal ash contains toxic chemicals such as mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. The EPA's STEM electric ELG rule was designed to control these and other toxic discharges. Expected to eliminate 1.4 billion pounds of toxic discharges, or 90% of all heavy metals entering the waterways. But the EPA projected 451 to 566 million per year in benefits associated with the rule and a minimal impact on electricity generating capacity prices. Why, despite these numbers, EPA has blocked implementation, is considering revising and weakening these standards?
So the SEAM electric rule, we are reanalyzing, and we took 2 waste streams out of the 5 or so that were done under the SEAM electric rule update. We're reanalyzing the information and the data, and we currently have a proposal over at OMB, and so I'm not, at this stage, I'll wait for that proposal to hit the streets, and you'll have your explanation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to close, this was something, I don't know if you're Republican or not, we're all Americans, it doesn't make any difference if you're Republican, but there are Republicans around because of this administration, and this is one of the good things Richard Nixon did. So please, uphold this for the people's health, and for a little bit that we can think of Richard Nixon in a positive way. I yield back the balance of my time.